I was born and raised in a suburb of Massachusetts in a middle-class environment. My dad had gone into the Navy during World War II, and his Ozzie and Harriet and Father Knows Best were two of the popular shows on TV, which bore absolutely no resemblance to the reality that we were all experiencing. So we went to church on Sunday. I got dressed up like a little man with a suit and a bow tie and a hat. My sisters all had white gloves and pretty hats and matching outfits that my mother made for, and there was this whole parade of going to church and being all dressed up, and we all sat there like the ideal American family. And then church would get over and we'd get into the car. And then they'd be yelling and screaming and slapping and hitting and crying, and and church seemed like this ideal that was far removed from the reality. It was beginning to be real disillusioned with the church because of the difference between the ideals of the church and what I soon came to identify as the hypocrisy of the church and the reality of what people really lived and did. And so I, along with tens of millions of people my age, became disillusioned with America, the government, society, church, and everything else, and went our own ways. With the death of John Kennedy in '63, and then the subsequent death of Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy, it seemed like what we needed to do was to build an alternative society. So my wife and I got married in '65, and we went out to San Francisco in '66, lived out there. And we believed that we were creating a new society. We believed we were, quote, realists. And part of that realism was we didn't believe in supernatural things. We didn't believe in religion. We didn't believe in God. What I wanted to do was to be an artist and an art teacher, so I finished my graduate studies at the University of California, Berkeley. Did a year in New Mexico on a grant, which was wonderful. I love New Mexico. And then got an offer to be part of starting an art program at a university in Kentucky, at a school that had just started, and that seemed like a real sort of pioneering thing, because I imagined Kentucky was like log cabins and horse farms and things like that. To my great surprise, there weren't any log cabins or horse farms in the area that I moved into, but became a careerist, a hedonist, a careerist, a materialist. And in our society then, and I don't think it's changed much today, the real philosophy of our society, the real religion, if you will, of our society, is rugged individualism. And I was a part of it. And I wanted to be a successful part of it, and that was my life. To the neglect of everybody and everything. Because part of being a successful artist is to be driven, and anything that distracts you from the pursuit of excellence in your art must be cast away, including family, including friends. I mean, everything has to be focused on success. I used to think that there was somehow, there was a place in the core of my being, like in my heart, where there was something terribly missing. There was just nothing there at all. So the way that I tried to anesthetize myself from the pain that caused was with alcohol and busyness and success and power and pleasure and stuff like that. In 1985, I took a group of students along with my wife on an art tour. Last day of the trip, the next day we would be leaving. We were going to drive back to ship it all in Amsterdam and fly out. And they were all still getting up and getting ready, and we were in my room, and I was talking to one of my students, Monica Schoner. My wife was there, and I was saying, like, can you go get, the people ready? Like, this is our last day. Like, let's get going here. And this was at 11 o'clock, so they were being real lazy about getting going. They're just pooped, worn out. And I was talking to her, and in the middle of a sentence, I just collapsed down to the ground. What I thought had happened was I thought I had been shot. And I was very surprised that I couldn't see where the bullet had come through, because I knew they would make a hole in the glass, obviously. The pain was in the very center of my abdomen, pretty much, and it was inside, not on the outside. This doctor got me up off the floor and onto the bed, and he examined me, and he knew exactly what was wrong. He said, you've perforated your duodenum. He said that I would be taken to a hospital, and that I would have surgery right away. I'd be in the hospital for about 4 weeks. Then I would be able to get on a plane and go home. Taken up to the 3rd floor of that hospital. The ride actually turned out to be very painful, because I was in kind of bad shape by the time we got to Cochin. We were expecting immediately to be going to surgery. And that's what we'd been told by the doctor at the hotel, the 2 doctors in the emergency room. After several hours, the pain had gotten excruciating. For several hours now, I felt that the only thing that kept me from death was an intense desire to live. And that all as I had to do to die was to stop trying to live. I felt like death was right there. It's hard to describe it. Just imagine that, like, you're hanging over a pit by your fingers, hanging onto the edge, and all you have to do is let go, and you're in the pit. That's how I felt about me and death. And I closed my eyes. I didn't try and breathe anymore. And I went unconscious. I awoke from my unconsciousness. I don't know. Obviously, I don't know how long I was unconscious. It was some minutes, probably. And I was standing next to the bed, and I was absolutely clear about the situation that I was in. So I was worried about the perforation in my stomach, but it didn't hurt. I was worried about getting an operation, but right now I didn't need an operation. I was confused because I felt more real, more alive, more physically acute in all 5 senses than I'd ever felt my whole life. Right then I heard people calling me by name in English outside the room, and they were saying, Howard, hurry up, come with us quickly, let's go. So the room was very bright and well lit. And I went over to the doorway of the room, and outside the room, it wasn't dark, but it was dim and gray and foggy and indistinct. I assumed that they were there to take me to my surgery, so I left the room. One of the strange things was, when I left the room, I knew that it was a one-way door. But after walking for what in this world would be like an hour or 2, I came to the realization that this isn't right. There's something really wrong, because there's no way this hallway would be this big. And now the hallway wasn't a hallway anymore. It was just space that we were walking through. And there were no walls or ceiling or windows or stairs or anything. It was just we were walking in space. When I would ask them questions, usually the answer was, shut up. We don't have time. You'll find out. Don't ask questions. Be quiet. There's more and more people, and it's gone from dim to just plain dark, absence of light. People have gotten really rude now. People are talking about me, and when I would say, like, are you talking about me? They'd just like hush up. About me? They'd just like hush up, or someone would say, shh, don't let them hear you. Stuff like that. Getting really paranoid. they said, "You're almost there," and they started to push and pull me in the direction that we'd been going. And so I tried to resist them. And the more I resisted, the more they fought, pushing and pulling. And then they were beginning to hurt me, so I was trying to hurt them back by punching them and kicking them, and they were mostly scratching and biting at first. There were a lot of them now. I have absolutely no idea. Maybe as few as some dozens, maybe as many as hundreds. But it was just a melee with me in the very center of it, and everyone trying to get in. I felt very strong, felt very powerful, and I'm doing everything in my power to resist them, which was completely futile because there's so many of them. I also noticed that anything I did to them had absolutely no effect on them whatsoever. And I also realized that they were feeding off my emotion, which was terror. And along with this, verbally, they were trying to be as insulting and demeaning as possible. And they're quite good at it. They'd practiced a lot. So there was the verbal assault along with the physical assault. And thirdly, there was laughter. I was all, the word that I like to use is I was all spent. Emotionally, physically, I had nothing left. I was just, and people were tired of me because I was no longer of any use to them, of any fun to them. And they, people were coming up to me and very casually, like kicking me. And when people kicked me, I had no reaction. The reason why I had no reaction was being kicked anymore didn't increase my pain because the pain was so great that it didn't make any difference. And I heard myself in a voice that seemed to be coming from my chest, and it certainly was not coming from my throat or my lips, say, "Pray to God." And since I was, a self-declared atheist, I thought, I don't pray to God. I can't pray to God. Second time, pray to God. And I thought, I don't really know how to pray. I mean, even if I were going to pray, I couldn't pray. So, pretty pointless. And then a third time, I heard this voice that sounded like me emanating from what seemed to be my chest say, "Pray to God." And I started to say something like, "The Lord is my shepherd, for purple mountains' majesty and amber waves of grain. I pledge allegiance to the flag. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, God bless America, land that I love." And I realized, no, this is... I'm getting everything confused here. It's all mixed up, and, things that I had recited as a child. But somewhere along the line, I had muttered a few of these things, trying to remember them. And the people that were around me found it absolutely unbearable that I would mention God. They were using language which was unlike any use of the English language that I'd ever heard before. So obscene, so vindictive, so cruel. And it really made me happy because I knew that I could get back at them. For the first time, I was able to have some revenge on them. And I also knew that they were receding into the darkness. They could not bear the mention of God, so I'm trying to think of things that have God in it. And I'm shouting them and screaming them. And they're retreating and retreating into the darkness. And I'm shouting and screaming, and then lying on the floor of this place, shouting, "God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her." Like crazy stuff, you know. And all of a sudden I realized I can't hear anything except me. So I stop and I listen, and there's no sound out there. So I yelled out in the darkness, "Jesus, please save me." And he appeared as a spot of light and very rapidly got very bright and very big and came over me in an impossibly white light. And he reached down and picked me up and lifted me up to him. And in his light, I saw myself for the first time, and I was gore. I was just all gore. Horrible, disgusting, unrecognizable unrecognizable as a person. And when he touched me, all the gore and wounds, it was like they were made of fine dust, like flour or confectionery sugar. And it was like his light just blew all the gore away. Impossible to describe. Very frustrating, because if I could describe it in any way, it would be quite impressive to people, but it's completely ineffable. I knew that this was Jesus. I knew that he was very powerful. I mean, he picked me up as if I was nothing at all, as if I were a feather. I knew, I don't know how I knew this, but I knew he knew me more than I knew me. I knew that I didn't have any secrets. Everything I was and had done and thought, I knew. So I don't know how, but I just knew he knew it all. He knew everything about me. But most importantly, I knew that he loved me in a way that I had never even dreamt he could be loved. And after a while, we started to leave this place of darkness, torment, pain, and we went straight up. And I think we were moving pretty fast. Pretty hard to tell, but we were making a lot of progress quickly. And I could see far, far away the focal point of light that we were headed towards, and that everything around us moved in relationship to that focal point. In other words, everything was either moving towards that focal point or moving away from that focal point of light. And all of a sudden I knew that somewhere in that focal point of light was God, and we were going there. And I thought to myself, they've made a terrible mistake. I'm garbage. I don't belong here. And with that, we came to an immediate halt, and he spoke to me for the first time directly into my mind, having heard my thoughts, knowing all my thoughts. And he said, "We don't make mistakes, you do belong here." And so we began to converse. Him knowing everything that I thought, and me hearing his voice in my mind, not going through my ears. Then he said that he had friends that he wanted me to meet. I was, sure. He made musical tones, musical sounds, and other people of light came to us and hung. We were all hanging in space, sort of halfway between the world of dark and the world of light. And we're hanging there, and they began to try and put me at ease. Fairly shortly, they made it clear that what they had come to do was to show me their record of my life. And what I came to understand was these people at different times in my life, sometimes singularly and sometimes in groups, had been with me during my life, and they had recorded my life. So what they were showing me was their record of my life, not my record of my life. And we did in chronological order from a baby forward. And they only showed me episodes. There'd be this episode, then we'd skip some time, and then we'd see this episode. So it wasn't like I saw my entire life or anything like that. It was like their selected record. And what they were showing me was how I had interacted with other people. After a while, it became very evident that's all they were interested in, was how I had interacted with other people. And to put it in a word, compassion. They only had one criteria for evaluating my life, and that was whether I had been compassionate or not compassionate towards other people. So things started off pretty good as a kid, and then they, becoming a teenager and then becoming a young adult and stuff, things got worse because they became less compassionate and more manipulative and self-centered. So I became, it was very disturbing to watch my life, especially because they were sharing with me their evaluation of how I was doing. So as I became less compassionate, they shared their displeasure and unhappiness with my life. And one would occasionally see me do something kind. They would get very happy, but there were getting to be too few of those occasions of happiness and way too much of the displeasure. The only thing that made this at all bearable was the fact that throughout it all, I knew that they loved me. So they invited me to ask any question I wanted to ask them, and everything they answered was very clear, very straightforward. Their teaching style was to not just explain verbally, but also show you. So I don't know, I don't think we ever went anywhere. Maybe we did. It's impossible to tell, because like I'd ask a question about the future and would be in the future. I think they just like created the future around us. I don't know if we went to, I have no way of knowing. I would ask a question about like the Holocaust, and we were in the Holocaust. I wanted to go on. I wanted to go on to heaven. I wanted to go on to experience the wonders and the joys and the beauty of heaven. And ultimately I wanted to go on and to meet God at the very core of heaven. And they said no. I was back in the bed, in that body, just filled with pain, with my wife next to me crying. The difficult thing about it has been, it's not a question about whether people believe my experience or not. I don't really care one way or the other. I mean, it really doesn't matter to me, because like I had my experience, it was real, and whether someone believes it or not, you know, that's up to them. It really doesn't contribute or detract from my life one bit. What I do want people to know about is the reality of God and Jesus Christ. That matters to me a great deal. And I live to evangelize. I live to spread the good news of Jesus Christ. That's what I live for. God has tried to get through to us, literally millions and millions and millions of times. Matter of fact, everybody has access to God. All they have to do is to, call it prayer, call it meditation, call it contemplation, but if you really sincerely seek God, God is not that hard to find. We have been a big disappointment to God, because we have just consistently refused to listen to God. As a pastor, you know, people say, why does God allow this? Why does God allow this child to die? Why does God allow the war in the Holy Land to, you know, continue between the Israelis and the Palestinians? Why does God allow people to suffer, etc., etc.? And that question is predicated on a false assumption. God doesn't want any of these things to happen. It's all against God's will. It's our perverse nature, our sinful nature, that allows these things to happen, causes these things to happen. If we were following God's will, they wouldn't be happening. So God, we tend to ascribe to God all the bad things that happen and take responsibility for the good things that happen, when in reality it's just the opposite. God wants us to live in harmony with one another and in harmony with the creation. And the conflict and the suffering that we're experiencing in this world is of a human origin, not originated by God. When Jesus came into the world, it was a great opportunity for the whole world to find a new way of living and interacting with one another. And we all have failed, and I would lay the greatest responsibility upon Christianity itself, because Christianity were the ones that were supposedly the ones that were heirs to the revelation of God, and Christians have failed, and they were the ones that were given the clear transmission of what God's desire was. God is unhappy with humankind, unhappy with the way the world is going, unhappy with the way God's beautiful creation is being treated. And God is intervening in a very direct way in the world today. And God and the angels are about trying to promote a spiritual awakening. In American history, we have these things called the Great Awakening. Well, we are living in the Great Awakening. And it was made clear to me that this is it. Wake up, or the slate will be wiped clean. Now, I'm not talking about the annihilation of the earth. I'm talking about, from a population of whatever, 260 million people, the United States could go down to a population of a few tens of thousands. We, the United States, who have been given the great blessing, more than any other nation, more than any other peoples in the history of the world, we've been given the blessing. We have the power and the material wealth to be agents, in church terms they're called missionaries, but agents of transformation to this world. And we have not fulfilled God's expectation of what we're supposed to be doing, which is bringing about not just material prosperity and security and well-being to the rest of the world, but more importantly, moral understanding, spiritual wisdom to the rest of the world. And in truth, if one has traveled around the world and you speak to foreigners about what the United States represents, what we represent to the rest of the world is violence, conquest, domination, exploitation, evil, pornography. And by pornography, I'm speaking more about the pornography of violence and abuse than just sexual pornography. And the United States has been given this role because we've been given this blessing. And we need to work on our awakening, which, going back to religious terms, is conversion. And we need to be doing it now. In the near future, it's going to be too late, and some other people will be chosen. We will lose the blessing. One of the follies that we live in is we think we deserve to be the richest, most powerful nation in the world. That's wrong. We don't deserve it. We don't deserve it at all. It's a gift from God. God can take the gift away as God has given the gift. and it will be catastrophic. And this country will simply be the lowest nation in the world instead of the highest, the poorest nation in the world instead of the richest, the weakest nation in the world instead of the strongest, and some other nation will be called to show the world the way of Jesus Christ. I don't know how it's going to play out, because I was shown possibilities, and I don't know if those possibilities are the way things may be or the way things will be. I don't know. I'm not clear on that. Our future could be so beautiful, and the future that they showed me, which isn't very far off, within a couple hundred years, which in fact I told them was impossibly soon. It couldn't happen in a couple hundred years. They assured me that with the intervention of God and the angels, it could happen. I don't know what's going to come about. I have children and I have grandchildren. I want them to have the preferred future, not the horrible possible future that they also showed me. And it's all about a heart change. We need to use our wealth. We need to be using our power to bring God's love and God's goodness and God's blessings to the whole rest of the world. And my experience happened in 1985. I've seen signs of good happening, and I've seen signs of bad happening, and I just don't know which way we're going. And I'm doing everything that I can with my life to be on God's side. They also told me that there is no sitting on the fence. You are either working for God's good or you're opposed to God's good. To be indifferent to God's good is to be opposed to it. There's no middle ground. In this, if you will, battle between good and evil, there's nothing in between. You know, I would say that most people say, well, you know, I mean, I'm good, I'm not doing any harm. That's not good. That's evil. You have to be out there loving God, loving your neighbor, and living that. If you're really, you know, part of God's plan for this world. This is the day. This is the moment to decide which way you're going to go. And all those seemingly hysterical, fundamentalist, evangelical preachers that are out there screaming and yelling are right on target. You know, their message may be a little harsh and their means may be a little too confrontational, but they're right. You know, we need to convince people that they have to make a decision, or that they're going to be on God's side or they're going to be opposed to God. The world that they showed me in the near future, in a couple hundred years from now, is a world that is difficult for me to understand or accept. There was what I saw was no visible signs of technology. If there was technology, they hid it from me, or it was so subtle that I couldn't even see it. You know, maybe that's the case, but I assumed that, like, in the future, it would be a world of, like, high technology, and they showed me a world of not low technology, of no technology, where people's relationship with God, with the creation, and with one another was so intense that human beings controlled the weather of the planet. Not just for the welfare of human beings, but for the welfare of the entire planet. Everybody in the world was telepathically connected to everybody else in the whole world. People raised food by simply, I don't know, meditating or thinking about the food, and the food would just grow, and then they would pick it and eat it. I mean, it was, you know, not instantaneous, but just happened before your eyes. I mean, a cabbage would grow from a seed to a full-blown cabbage in a matter of a few minutes. People lived in small communities. People could move from community to community freely if they wanted to. Most people didn't move around very much. Some communities put an emphasis on music, some communities put an emphasis on science, some communities put an emphasis on celebration, liturgy, worship. Some communities spent their time on physical relaxation and enjoyment, sports, and that sort of thing. Some communities were very contemplative and did seemingly very little. Some communities were very active and sort of like were very much engaged with their environment, sort of what we would call gardeners, but they were literally environmental sculptors, you know, making these very beautiful places with the vegetation and the geology around them. I mean, different communities had different emphasis, but they lived in total harmony with the flora and the fauna around them, in complete harmony with one another, and the main emphasis of every community was the individuals in the community, and most especially the children. When people had experienced what they felt was their full life experience, there would be a great celebration, and they would lay down, and they would die, and their souls, their spirits, whatever, would be raised up to heaven. Dying was not seen as a sad thing or grievous thing. It was a joyous time. It was like it was celebrated as a birth. People ate simply, dressed simply. From what I was shown, there were no possessions other than the clothes on their back and a few simple instruments like musical instruments or tools or things like that, which were pretty much shared communally. It was a world that's very difficult for me to make any sense of it, because it's like, you know, there was great happiness, there was very little suffering, there was no disease because people could, with laying on of hands, people could heal diseases immediately. The only real suffering that they showed me was sometimes people felt a sense of separateness, and the community would allow these people to feel that, but they would pray for that person, they would surround that person with love and bring that person back into the community. So it was possible for people to move a little bit away from the spirit of the community, but they were brought back into the community. No one was left, no one was ever lost for very long. But it was important sometimes for people to feel, you know, to appreciate what they had. They needed to, you know, lose a little bit of it once in a while. The Spirit of Christ lived in every heart, fully and completely. It's a world that is so completely unlike the world that we live in, that just how can we ever get there? But they assured me that this was the world that God envisioned for us, and it's not that far away. One of the questions I asked them about was, what was heaven like? And I shouldn't tell you the answer, because anybody that really knew what heaven was like wouldn't want to be here anymore, and they'd want to be there, because this is so inferior to heaven, and heaven is so superior to this world in every way that it makes no sense to be here. But you don't get to heaven by killing yourself. That's not. That's a very unlikely way to access heaven. because to kill oneself would be a rejection of God. And so, I guess that's one of the reasons why knowledge of heaven has been so obscure, because we don't really need to know about it. Heaven, just a few little things about it. Every possibility of life and every interesting and wonderful thing that ever was, is, or will be, not just in this world, but in the entire universe and in all the dimensions, is in heaven. So heaven has the essence and the knowledge of everything that was and is yet to be. And one has an opportunity to see and feel and touch and know and experience. So, I mean, obviously one can spend an eternity in heaven just experiencing things, just looking at things, just getting to know things, being around things. Heaven is layered like an onion, and the outer part of heaven is seems like the physical world, because that's the entry level for beings from the physical world. And then as one goes deeper and deeper into heaven, it has different rules of physics and different properties. So it gets more and more wondrous and mysterious and interesting the deeper you go into heaven. And at the core of heaven, at the very center of heaven, is God, and a vast array of beings who have become so holy. And by holy, I mean W-H-O-L, was it? L-E-Y, I guess, and H-O-L-Y, become so whole, so complete, that there's no longer any doubt, any blemish, any shadow, any hesitancy, and they are ready and eager to be one with God, to be in communion with God. People don't come to that easily, but it is the desire of all beings to come to that place where they are in communion with God. And in the center of heaven, people are invited to participate with God in the ongoing act of creation. And the way that they participate is by bringing their uniqueness, their self, their personality, their life experience to God. And the only analogy, I mean, the way they explain it to me in the analogy is that they now become part of the song of creation, or as it's been said, they become part of the heavenly choir. God is the conductor and composer of the song of creation, but each of us gets to bring our own unique self, our own unique instrument, voice, into that choir and participate with God in that. And the song of creation is in fact the creation. Or, to put it another way, we are being sung by God in the heavenly choir. And if God in the heavenly choir to cease the song, there would be no physical universe. There would be no time, there'd be no space, there'd be no matter, no energy, because in fact what the universe is vibratory states of space created by the song of creation. And that's who and what we are and what we experience. And so we come back to our source. We emanate from there. It's our origin and our source, where we come from. We come out into this world and have a variety of experiences, even including the bizarre experience of thinking that we're somehow separate and unique and apart from all of that. Things that we're here to learn is how utterly connected and dependent we are in all of that. We're all connected. We're all, in a sense, part of the one. And so what we get to experience in this life is both our separateness and our connectedness to the one. One of the interesting things in my experience was the angels and Jesus always referred to God as the one. I found it interesting in the Bible that God is very often referred to as the one. And the most profound prayer of the Jewish faith proclaims that God is one in the Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, and the Lord is one. And that the singularity and totality and completeness of God really is the beginning of wisdom and our relationship to that, because from this singular, complete one, we are a part of that oneness, and that's what our return to God teaches us. And in human terms, it's coming home. When we go to heaven, we have come back to where we were born from, where we belong and who we are. And to come to God in the center of heaven is to come back into the bosom of our mother, our father, our creator, and to finally be home, really home, and to know and to be known, to receive love and to give love. And that's our completeness, because that's what we are. We are an act of God's love expressed out, and we bring that love back in a new and profound way to God from this experience of life, even from this experience of separateness. Once we know who we are, we know we're no longer really separate anymore. Even though sometimes I feel like a stranger in a strange land, I know that what separates me from God is very little. So that's one of the weird things. Although heaven and hell seem far away, they're really here, very, very close. The reason why they're so close is that it's dimensional travel. It's not space and time travel. And so, even in this world, God is not so far away. And God hasn't, through the Holy Spirit, that can dwell inside of us, and does dwell inside of us. We can know how close God is, because God is both ultimately completely transcendent and other, and completely immanent and present at the same time. Theologians argue, is God completely transcendent or immanent? And the truth is, yes, both. So one of the things that we can do in this world is to contemplate God, contemplate the love of God, contemplate the closeness of God, contemplate the beauty of God, the completeness and singularity of God. Bible says all things work for God's good purpose for those who love God. Because the reality is, and this is one of the big profound truths that the Bible's trying to teach us, is that God wins. Ultimately, it's all about God. And it's all from God and returns to God and is of God. And all this sense of separateness and sin and chaos and evil are all things that we need to work our way through to return to the completeness and perfection of that which is God. I asked them if there were other worlds, and they said, yeah, there's, the universe is full of other worlds, and there are other dimensions of other physical universes, and those are filled with other worlds. So there's worlds in our physical universe